Hey guys, tonight we're going to step softly into the dust and olive groves of ancient Israel. The air smells like warm cedar and old scrolls. You're surrounded by firelight, murmured psalms, and the comforting rhythm of distant shepherd flutes. The stars are out brilliant in ancient jests like the 12 tribes that walk. Beneath them, it's peaceful, but not for long. You probably won't survive this kingdom's next century, because tonight, we're beginning a journey into one of history's most puzzling vanishings, the disappearance of 10 whole tribes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far or curious, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where my fellow night travelers drift off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the golden age of a once united kingdom. 12 tribes descendants of the sons of Jacob have carved out a home in this sun-baked land. You can still hear stories of how they escaped Egypt, wandered through wilderness, and crossed into Canaan. It's the era of kings and chronicles, of Jerusalem's first glory, of priests in linen robes and courtyards thick with incense. You see Judah and Benjamin down south, clinging close to the temple like loyal old friends. But it's the 10 northern tribes, Reuben, Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Ephraim, and Manasseh, that sprawl across hills and rivers. They're rich with farmland, houses, trade routes, and stories. But their unity is thin cracks run between loyalties, like seams in old leather. The first kings tried. Saul stumbled. David triumphed. Solomon dazzled with gold and wisdom. But with Solomon's death, the kingdom split like a clay pot dropped on stone. You walk that fracture line. North becomes Israel. South becomes Judah. The capital shifts. The faith flickers. Temples rise in Samaria. Golden calves are set up in Bethel and Dan. You stare at one polished, heavy UNMOVING. People bow before it. You're not sure whether to laugh or weep. Prophets start warning of doom. Hosea talks of unfaithful love. Amos thunders about justice and locusts, but it's like singing lullabies to a hurricane. The kings in the north, most are a mess. Some are outright disasters. There are coups, assassinations, short reigns, pagan altars, and foreign gods sneaking into every village hearth. When life goes on, you pass vineyards blooming near Jezreel. Children laugh along the Jordan. Merchants haggle in the markets of Tirzah. There's a strange balanced faith and fear, tradition and temptation. You taste pomegranates sweet enough to make you forget the coming storm. Then, one day, a name starts floating through the streets like smoke. Assyria. It's not local. It's distant, but it feels heavy. You hear travelers from the east talk about Nineveh's walls. Soldiers like shadows. Kings with names that sound like thunder. And somewhere inside your chest, a quiet voice whispers, "Run." Historians still argue whether Israel had a chance, whether alliances could have saved them, or whether the collapse was baked in from the start. But you're here now, and it's beautiful, and it's fragile, like watching a spider web glinting in the sun just before a broom sweeps through. One night, you sit beneath a fig tree. There's music in the distance, and maybe, just maybe, you feel something ending. It's not loud, not yet, but the world you're in now. 12 brothers, 12 tribes. One promise it's not going to last tomorrow. The world will change. You lean back into the grass. The stars blink above, and the whisper of exile stirs in the wind. You wake to smoke on the horizon, not the gentle kind, like wood smoke from early morning bread ovens. This is darker, thicker. It rolls like a bruise across the sky. Assyria has arrived. You trudge toward the northern hills where the kingdom of Israel once stretched like a patchwork quilt. But now, that quilt is unraveling, thread by thread. You pass towns with shutters closed, fields half-harvested, and shepherds who no longer sing. The Assyrian Empire, to be honest, wasn't known for its chill. These guys were the ancient world's equivalent of a steamroller dipped in blood and bureaucracy. They didn't just conquer, they absorbed. They turned your gods into their footnotes and your children into tributes. You hear their language before you see them, harsh consonants shouted, commands, metal against metal. Then, one morning, they're soldiers like stone, columns, eyes like flint dot armor that glints like dragon scales in the sun. You try to hide in a vineyard, but the grapes betray you. A young girl grabs your hand. Her eyes are too old. She says her family's contagion. East-End, she doesn't know which tribe she belongs to anymore. Welcome to the exile. The Assyrian policy wasn't just to win, it was to erase. They uprooted entire populations and shuffled them like cards. Hebrew-speaking farmers from Naphtali. Now they live in a dusty corner of Media. Meanwhile, strangers from far-off lands get plopped into Samaria to replace them. It's historical gentrification with a twist of cultural amnesia. Historians still argue whether all 10 tribes were truly exiled. Some say fragments remained, hiding in the hills, blending with Judah. Others believe the deportation was so thorough that Israel's northern identity simply ... dissolved. But for now, see the evidence with your own tired feet. You walk along the Euphrates, past caravans of displaced families, their dialects bent, their traditions dim. They light fires, not with joy, but with muscle memory. One man still carries a Torah scroll wrapped in linen. He treats it like a child, whispering to it, rocking with it. Another woman has stitched the names of her tribe Zebulun, Dan into the hem of her cloak. The thread is frayed on by now. You're far from Canaan. The stars don't look right. The air smells of foreign herbs and fire pits. But in every dusty village you pass, someone tells you the same thing. We used to be a tribe. Now we're just a story. Here's a fun or not so fun tidbit. One Assyrian tablet from this era mentions a group called the people of the house of Omri, likely referring to the Israelites. But after that, it's silence. No more tribal names, no more Reuben or Asher. Just shadows. You sit beneath a palm tree in exile. Your feet ache. You don't know if it's the 3rd or 30th day of wandering. And still, a small boy hums a Hebrew lullaby by the fire. You recognize the melody. That's the thing. Culture doesn't vanish all at once. It seeps. It hides. It waits. Some say the tribes were lost, like coins in a vast desert. Others think they scattered like seeds, waiting to bloom somewhere no one was looking. You lie back. The stars faint, but familiar begin to shimmer. The girl from the vineyard curls up nearby. She's humming now, too. Something about Jacob's ladder. You don't know all the words, but it makes you feel less alone. The tribes are falling silent, one by one. But silence isn't the same as forgetting. It's just ... The pause before the next story begins. You wake to dust in your throat and parchment in your hands. The desert stretches around you, pale and endless, like a forgotten scroll, still waiting to be read. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to realize this story won't have a tidy ending. The 10 tribes have vanished, but people talk. People remember. You find yourself in Babylon, first not as a conqueror or a prophet, but as a quiet observer. The southern kingdom of Judah is still hanging on, for now, like a cracked teacup on a wobbling shelf. But the northern tribes are already legends in the making. You see scribes hunched over oil lamplit tables. They scratched names onto tablets and scrolls of Saka, scarred-like, Gad-like, trying to write shadows back into existence. Historians still argue whether the first legends of the lost tribes began as Greek therapy or divine mystery. But either way, They caught fire. You hear whispers that the tribes were carried beyond the river, that they live on the edges of the known world, that they'll return at the end of days. You raise an eyebrow. Sure, and maybe they're sipping mango juice with unicorns too. But then, you hear the same story again and again. One old man swears he met descendants of Stan in the mountains of Media. A trader says he saw Levite rituals along the Caspian coast. A camel driver tells you of a hidden people who pray facing Jerusalem, even though they've never been there. You want to roll your eyes? The details are oddly consistent, and sometimes it's not enough to keep a myth alive. As the centuries roll by and you float through them like a soft wind, you start to notice something strange. The farther the Israelites get from their homeland, the larger the legends become. You're in Alexandria now, in a busy scroll shop. One papyrus claims that the tribes are living beyond the river, some Baishna mythical torrent that only stops flowing on the Sabbath, which is convenient because that's when you can't travel anyway. Another scroll says the tribes headed east and built their own kingdom in Asia, a quiet empire of exiles waiting patiently for a sign. You sip warm wine and try not to laugh. Then again, the city is filled with strangers who seem to know parts of your old songs. You meet a sailor who swears he found a tribe near India with circumcision and kosher laws. Their Hebrew is dusty, but their fire is strong. You want to ask how he knows. Instead, you just smile and say, "Tell me more." There's a theory whispered in dim corners. What if the tribes never disappeared? What if they just became stories? You drift forward in time, slipping past scroll after scroll. The Talmud gets written, the Midrash expands, the Book of Ezra saw. Dramatic. Second-hand history says the 10 tribes crossed a mysterious river and vanished into another land until the end of time. Honestly, it's the kind of plot twist a Netflix series would stretch over 4 seasons. You pause in a small village library in Persia. Hey, boy is reading from a weathered leather book. He looks up at you and says, "My grandfather says, where? From Naphtali. But I don't even know what that means." You nod. You don't either. Here's the quirky part. Even while people argued about where the tribes went, no one really questioned whether they were out there. They had to be. Otherwise, what were we all waiting for? Some dreamed of their return as a sign of the Messiah. Others imagined a righteous army, hidden beyond mountains that would rise and restore glory. You take a long walk through the desert again. It's quiet, the stars above, but haven't changed. But the names echo differently now. They're not just tribes, they're metaphors, lost parts of ourselves, ideas we exiled long ago, but still long to find. You sit beneath an acacia tree and pick at a dry fig. It's sweet and gritty. You think about that mythical river, the one that rages all week but rests on the Sabbath. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the tribes weren't lost on accident. Maybe they were placed somewhere sacred, somewhere rest lives, somewhere memory flows. Only when you're quiet enough to hear it. The fig splits in your hand, a seed falls, and somewhere a new myth takes root. You feel your sandals crack as you step into Persia. The sun here isn't harsh, it's gold, the kind that dusts mountaintops and temples and forgotten grave markers, the kind that makes even exile feel poetic, almost. You walk narrow stone roads, past houses with lattice windows and spiced air. The people speak in tongues foreign to your ear, but you catch fragments. Yahweh, Shalom, a name you haven't heard in a while. Ephraim, it's been generations since the Assyrians scattered the 10 tribes, and yet, here in ancient Persia where prophets once scribbled dreams into the margins of history, you start to notice something. The tribes may not be lost, just absorbed. You find communities, small, stubborn, familiar. They observe the Sabbath. They won't touch shellfish. They mumble prayers that sound like lullabies you haven't heard since Canaan. Historians still argue whether these groups are true. Remnants of the northern tribes or late arrivals from Judah. But the details don't lie. Their customs are slightly off. Their stories don't always match up. With the Jerusalem crowd, they speak of rivers and exiled, temples and kings. You share a meal in a desert village. Sitting cross-legged near a clay hearth, a wrinkled elder taps your shoulder. Manasseh, he says, proudly. You blink. He points to himself, to his grandchildren, to the embroidered name on a woven blanket. We remember, he whispers, and you believe him. Mostly see. The Persian Empire was huge at its peak, stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus Valley. It was a net that caught stories and peoples alike. And while most of the world sees the tribes as scattered embers, here in Persia, they're embers that keep flickering, quietly, stubbornly. One evening, you stand beneath a date tree. A woman sings to her child softly, slowly in a Hebrew dialect you don't quite recognize. The melody loops, and something inside you aches that you travel farther. Into the mountains of Media, you see clusters of families lighting oil lamps at sundown. Placing them just so, you ask them why. They shrugged. It's what our mothers did, and their mothers. You nod. That's how memory works. Not always in words, sometimes in hands, in habit, in where the light goes at night, in one forgotten village. You hear a legend, a peculiar one. It says that when the Messiah comes, the tribes will emerge from the mountains like rivers, unfreezing. They'll be wearing clothes of fire and speaking the tongue of angels. Also, someone adds, they might bring really good bread. It's silly, but it sticks. You pause in a marketplace along the But Suk Road. Jewish merchants trade alongside Zoroastrians and Buddhists. One man sells dyed cloth with menorahs stitched in the corner. Another whispers prayers over his spices before selling them. You ask where his people are from. He smiles. From somewhere west. Maybe Dan, maybe not. Even he doesn't know. And maybe that's the point. Maybe being lost doesn't mean forgotten. Maybe it just means the map changed. No one told the stories where to go. Here's a fringe little nugget. Some 19th century explorers believed they'd found lost tribe markers in Persian inscriptions and grave sites. Of course, many of those claims were generously speculative, like, this rock has a vaguely Hebrew-looking squiggle, must be Naphtali. Speculative, but you get the feeling they were looking for more than proof. They were looking for connection. You stroll past a caravan at dusk. Children are roasting dates over fire. Someone recites lines from the book of Isaiah, not from a scroll, carved from memory. And it's beautiful, because while the scholars scribble and debate and draw lines on maps, the people just live. They carry exile in their bones and hope in their footsteps. One young boy runs up to you. Dusty and breathless, he says, "Do you know the story of Joseph?" You nod. He smiles. "My uncle says we're his people. I think that's why I'm good at finding lost goats." You laugh. Finally, and in that moment, surrounded by the spice of cumin and the smoke of firewood, you realize maybe the tribes didn't need to stay whole to stay alive. Maybe being scattered didn't end the story. It just made the story wider. You walk toward the mountains. Somewhere out there is the next chapter. Somewhere beyond Persia, memory still breathes. You step off the stony edge of Persia and into a new world that smells of cardamom, of coconut oil, and monsoon earth. The road winds southeast now, not toward Jerusalem or Babylon, but into the spice-laced coastlines of India. Your feet touch sand that feels older than maps. And here, under palm trees and tangled banyan roots, hear something unexpected. A song in Hebrew, sort of. The dialect is softened, it's twisted, sprinkled with Marathi, but the rhythm, the heart of it, is unmistakably Jewish. You found the Bene Israel, They live along the western shores of India, mostly in Maharashtra. They say their ancestors were shipwrecked here long ago, maybe fleeing Assyria, maybe just swept by a cruel sea. 7 men and 7 women stood ashore like driftwood carrying a forgotten Torah. Historians still debate whether the Bene Israel truly descend from the northern tribes. There's no ironclad proof, but also there's no other group that sings Hebrew prayers while eating curried lentils and lighting Sabbath candles with coconut oil. You sit in a modest home with cracked white walls and a mezuzah faintly carved into the doorframe. Grandmother invites you in. She doesn't say much, but her eyes say everything. She shows you a small oil lamp passed down through generations. This one, she says, was lit by my great-grandmother, and her great-grandmother, too. You nod. It's not archaeology. It's something deeper. The archaeology of memory on Friday evenings. You watch families dress in their finest, saris and white tunics. They gather in prayer halls that echo with a strange blend of Hebrew and Hindi. The prayers are familiar, but the cadence dances differently. Here, more lyrical, more coastal. Someone tells you a joke. If Moses had come east instead of west, we'd all be having mangoes at Passover. You laugh into your sleeve. One teacher tells you that they've always known they were part of something larger, something ancient, but nobody came looking for us, he says, not bitterly, just factually. The Bene Israel lived in relative peace for centuries. They were never entirely hidden, but never quite noticed either to the outside world. They were invisible ink on the parchment of history. Then, the 18th century, Jewish traders from Iraq and Yemen began to show up. They raised an eyebrow at these coconut oil menorah lighters and said, "Wait a minute, you're Jews." You wander through the bustling streets of Mumbai, where modern Bene Israel families blend seamlessly into India's chaos. But on Friday evenings, they pause, they breathe, and somewhere, deep in the flicker of oil lamps, the story of the lost tribes catches its breath. A quirky fact: Bene Israel tradition holds that they forgot how to make challah, but remembered how to circumcise Dot, which, let's be honest, is kind of an odd trade-off. But you love it, because it proves something important. Faith mutates, but it doesn't dissolve. You ride a rickety bus into the countryside, fields of sugarcane and dusty roads give way to small villages. One man claims his ancestors came from the west, where the sky weeps fire. He doesn't know where exactly, but he knows they were from somewhere else, and that's a common thread, no matter where you go. The farther you get from Jerusalem, the louder that quiet voice gets. We came from somewhere else. We carry something older than us, even if we don't remember the name. We remember the weight. In one coastal town, you pass a wall with faint inscriptions, old Hebrew script, half erased by wind. You can see. You run your fingers over it. It says nothing now, but it meant something once. Maybe it was the name of a tribe. Maybe it was just someone's prayer. Either way, still whispering. You lie on a woven mat that night, the scent of turmeric and smoke in your hair. You hear distant laughter. It's one arguing about fish, and a lullaby floating through the humid air. It's half Hebrew, half Hindi. It makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. You fall asleep wondering how many other songs are still out there, half remembered, half sung, drifting through time like messages in a bottle, waiting for someone like you to listen. You trade your sandals for sturdier boots. The path ahead rises steep, narrow and dusty, like the beginning of an old prophecy. You're heading into the highlands, now into the rugged, folded mountains of Afghanistan and Pakistan, where the winds carry tales older than the rocks themselves. This is Pashtun country. Tribes here have names like Yusufzais, sons of Joseph. They speak Pashto, walk with pride, and doubly follow customs that look a little too familiar. You pause by a spring where young boys wash before prayer. The ritual is practiced, sacred, quiet. The water flows over their hands like memory. One of the elders notices you watching. He nods toward the boys and says, "Our ancestors came from far away, maybe from Israel." And then he shrugs, "Or maybe from heaven." The Pashtun Israelite theory is one of history's most curious side quests. It first surfaced in the 18th century, but the story goes back further past in fireside whispers and tribal poems. Some local traditions say they descend from the lost tribes of Israel, exiled long ago and swallowed by mountains. Historians still argue whether there's any truth to it. Some say it's colonial era wishful thinking. Others point to specific rituals like levirate marriage, abstaining from pork, circumcision on the 8th day. Coincidence? Maybe, but a mighty poetic one. You sip strong green tea in a woven tent. The wind whistles outside, dragging dust across the hills. Inside, the old Pashtun man tells you this. Our people came from Egypt. We wandered. We settled here when the stars turned. You glance up. The stars are turning now. Slow, eternal. He points to a symbol stitched into his shawl, 3 stripes. One for each lost brother. He doesn't know their names, but he knows they mattered. It's strange. Being here, everything looks nothing like ancient Israel. No olive groves, no stone altars. And yet, something clings to the air, like a story that's refused to be forgotten. In remote valleys, you find tribes that still practice ancient codes, hospitality, honor, purity. Some of it matches old Mosaic law, some of it doesn't. But that's the thing about oral tradition. It warps, and it clings. One young man shows you a carved walking stick passed down through generations. He says his great-grandfather used to tell stories about King David. You ask where he learned them. The boy grins. In dreams, you hike into Neurostan, where light filters through pines like old scripture. In one forgotten village, a shepherd sings a lament about a lost brother named Asher. He's never read the Bible. He just knows the name feels right. A quirky tidbit for your mental museum. British officials in the 19th century went absolutely wild for this theory. Some were convinced that the Pashtuns were the key to proving biblical prophecy. Others just thought it made for a cool tea time story. Spoiler alert, no DNA test has ever confirmed it. But then again, Kay can't trace longing, or folklore, or what it feels like to carry a name older than your bones. You will find a shrine built half from local stone, half from ancient-looking clay bricks. No one knows who built it, but people leave olive branches there. You smile. Coincidence? Sure. But again, poetic. The sun sets behind the peaks. Shadows stretch across the ridges like tribal banners. You think about how easy it is for people to forget and how hard it is for people to let go. Here, okay? The lost tribes aren't just a theory. They're a heartbeat, a story woven into wool and smoke. You sit by the fire that night. A man plays a flute, low and slow, like a lullaby trapped in stone. He doesn't call himself Jewish. He doesn't need to. He just plays, and something ancient hums along. You descend from the jagged ridges of Central Asia and head southwest to a land of sun-drenched plateaus and ancient stone churches. The wind shifts, the trees thin, and the soil turns red. Welcome to Ethiopia. The air smells of roasted coffee, incense, and old rain. You wander into the highlands, where the mountains watch like quiet grandfathers. And the people speak G as an ancient language that feels like chanting even in casual conversation. Here is the mystery of the lost tribes. It takes a new shape. Not hidden, not forgotten, but claimed boldly. The Beta Israel, sometimes called the Ethiopian Jews, live here. They've been here for centuries, maybe millennia, observing Jewish customs, keeping kosher, circumcising their sons, and reading scripture, not from scrolls, but from thick, hand-painted books. Historians still argue whether the Beta Israel is truly descend from the tribe of Dan. Some think they're converts, others believe they're remnants of an ancient migration, maybe even from King Solomon's time, and some just shrugged and say, "Why not both?" You sit under a fig tree beside a stone synagogue. A woman teaches children from a cloth-covered book stories of Moses, Deborah, and Samson. You ask where their ancestors came from. She smiles and says, "We were never lost. You just weren't looking in the right places." Her son brings you a bowl of injera and lentils. They say it's food of the exiles. You believe them. It tastes like longing wrapped in spices. And here's the wild part. For generations, the Beta Israel had no idea there were other Jews in the world. They thought they were all that remained. Imagine that, lighting Sabbath candles and murmuring ancient prayers, thinking you're the last flicker of a 3,000-year-old story. And they kept going. They kept believing. Quirky detail. The Beta Israel's version of the Torah includes extra traditions like unique festivals and rituals won't find in Jerusalem or New York. Some say these are ancient. Some say they're local. Improvisations. You say they're beautiful. You climb the hills toward Lalibela, where churches are carved into the mountains instead of built on top. It's like the earth itself tried to hold on to faith. A priest there shows you a cross that's so old it hums. He says, the tribes passed through here long ago. He doesn't know which ones, but he knows their footsteps still echo in the 20th century. Something astonishing happens. Israel launches Operation Moses and Operation Solomon mass airlifts that bring thousands of Ethiopian Jews to modern Israel. They weep as they land, many kiss the ground. They say, "We are home." But not all is perfect in Israel. Some question their traditions, their rituals, their skin. It hurts because after centuries of being the legend, are suddenly told they might not count. You watch a Beta Israel elder unfold a worn tapestry embroidered with tribal symbols and a river flowing west. He tells you that prophecy lives in the threads. You believe him because here, the story of the lost tribes isn't a ghost, it's a daily rhythm. It's in the way they brew coffee, in the way they bury their dead, in the way they keep telling their children, "We came from Dan." The sun begins to dip below the hills. Shadows stretch across stone churches and scattered fields. You hear a girl reciting psalms in a dialect that twists time, and you wonder maybe the tribes weren't so much lost, as scattered on purpose, like stars that like seeds, each one meant to grow in a different corner of the world. You lie down in the grass. The breeze is soft now. A goat bleats in the distance. Someone lights a lantern and hums a lullaby about wandering, and you think, maybe what matters most isn't the where, maybe it's the remembering. You walk into silence, not the peaceful kind like ocean's waves or sleeping babies. This silence is dusty, heavy. It lives in stone and scrolls, shadow. You've arrived at the edge of memory, the caves of Qumra, the cracked libraries of Cairo, and the backs of forgotten temples where someone long ago tried to write the tribes back into existence. This part of the journey isn't loud. It's not filled with markets or dancing or stories passed round like fruit. It's the part where you dig literally and spiritually. You duck into a cave near to the Dead Sea. Your footsteps echo, and there, hidden in jars and wrapped in linen, lie the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're not about the lost tribes exactly, but they breathe in the same rhythm. Prophecy, exiled, a deep, pulsing hope that something or someone will return. One scroll mentions a mysterious group called the Sons of Light. Some scholars believe they saw themselves as what the tribes could have become, or maybe what they used to be. You trace the ink with your eyes. The letters tremble, slightly handwritten, vulnerable. You feel like you're eavesdropping on someone's ancient heartbreak. Historians still argue that these communities were part of mainstream Judaism or radical fringe sects, but you don't care, because here's the truth. They were trying to remember, to rewrite, to recover what was lost in that. Just the tribes. But the idea of them, You blink and find yourself in Cairo now, in the Geniza, sacred storage space for worn-out Hebrew texts. It's an attic of ghost voices, letters, wills, recipes, and yes, rumors. You sift through parchment scraps and stumble upon a strange one. It says something about a Jewish kingdom beyond the river, where the people still sing the songs of Asher and Zed-Will. Is it true? Probably not, but it's not false either. It's a wish written down, and that makes it real in its own way. Here's a fun tidbit for your sleepy brain. In the Middle Ages, Jewish travelers would carry letters of introduction in case they stumbled upon the lost tribes. They were genuinely prepared to show up in some forest clearing and say, "Hey guys, we're cousins." No one ever did, but you kind of admire the optimism. You sit in a crumbling temple. A scribe tells you he once found a prayer that names all 12 tribes in a circle ending not with Judah, but with Dan. He thought that meant something. He still does. You walk through ruins where inscriptions whisper to the children of Naphtali, "May your rivers return." You climb a stairwell where a child once scratched a Star of David into sandstone, not for religion, but out of instinct. You pass through a ruined synagogue with its windows long gone. On the wall, a single sentence remains: "Wait for them." You stand there longer than you expected. The wind whistles, the dust settles. You wonder, were these scrolls trying to preserve faith, created so people still lost if someone remembers their name? In a dim archive in a forgotten part of Istanbul, you meet a man with a beard like Abrams and a laugh like thunder. He shows you a box. Inside is a torn map. It marks a land of the 10. No coordinates, just stars, mountains, and a river made of ink. You ask him if he believes it. He shrugs. Belief is cheaper than bread, he says, but sometimes it's all we have. You leave the archive at dusk. The street smells of coffee and ancient rain. A cat curls against your leg. Somewhere, a shopkeeper closes his shutters with a soft clack. You walk on, because scrolls aren't finished, because someone has to keep reading, even if the ending isn't written yet. You sail west now, past Cyprus, past Rhodes, past Malta's stubborn stone. The sea is deep and blue and full of questions. You're heading into Europe where the lost tribes weren't just whispered about. They were weaponized. The boat rocks. Gently docked gulls cackle above. And you wonder, not for the first time, why humans can't seem to leave a good mystery alone. You dock in Italy first, where Renaissance scholars pore over ancient Hebrew texts with a kind of caffeinated urgency. They aren't just looking for truth. They're chasing legends. They want proof that their church, their crown, her crusade was foretold in prophecy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. You wander into a candlelit library in Venice. One scholar with spectacles too big for his face leans over and whispers, "The 10 tribes. Oh, they live in the east. Vast armies, hidden kings, waiting for God's signal." He's very confident. He also has ink stains on his teeth. Historians still argue whether Europe's obsession with the lost tribes was genuine theology or just convenient fantasy. Probably both. You move north, and the weather turns cold in France and England. Medieval chroniclers wrote breathless accounts of mysterious Jewish kingdoms at the edge of the world. Some claimed the tribes lived in Ethiopia. Others insisted they had built a walled empire beyond Persia, protected by angels and iron gates. One chronicler even suggested they were 300,000 strong and would return riding on clouds. Very Marvel cinematic universe of them. Here's a quirky side note. In the 13th century, a letter appeared in Europe claiming to be from Prester Jana, mythical Christian king in the East Art, his kingdom. He said, bordered the land of the lost tribes. They were fierce, they were righteous, and they definitely weren't available for interviews. You curl up by a hearth in a chilly monastery. A monk shows you a tapestry faded but detailed, 12 figures in robes, 10 of them walking away from Jerusalem toward misty mountains. He touches the thread and says, "We keep telling their story because we need them to come back." And you get it. Europe, plagued by war and famine, wanted a spiritual cavalry. The lost tribes weren't just a mystery, they were a promise. You visit a Jewish kibbutz ghetto in Prague. A rabbi tells you that even in persecution, his people would look to the east and wonder, are they still out there? Do they pray for us too? You walk the cobblestone streets and notice tiny details. Okay? Menorah carved into a doorpost, a Hebrew letter tucked into a child's amulet, memory still breathing. You travel west again across the sea, to the windswept cliffs of Ireland and the misty lochs of Scotland. Yes, even there, theories sprang up. Some believed the ancient Celts were actually Israelites, lost, R-E-B-R-A-N-D-E-D, roaming, bagpipes instead of safars. It's not the most scholarly theory, but it does come with excellent music. You pass a man on a rocky shore who insists the tribe of Dan came here and named the river Don and every place but Dan. And the name is a stretch, but a charming one. You walk into a cold stone church where a stained glass window shows Jacob blessing his sons. The labels are wrong. The colors are fading, but the sentiment's there. You hear it whispered again in Oxford, in whispered Latin, in Toledo, in passionate Sephardic debates, in Vienna, in coffee houses filled with smoke and slow, sorrowful violins. Everyone wants to know, where did they go? But maybe the better question is, why are we still looking? You return to your boat. The sea is darker now, the stars brighter, and somewhere behind you, the church bell tolls. You lie on the deck, wrapped in a borrowed coat, and wonder if the lost tribes were never meant to be found. ... What if their true legacy was this endless search? Not a destination, but a yearning. The water rocks you to sleep, and in your dream, you see 10 figures walking along the shoreline. They don't speak, they just walk, not lost, just farther down the road. You reach the edge of the known world, or at least the place where maps once wrote, "Here be dragons." You're standing on the shores of China now. Yes, China where, even here, whispers of the lost tribes manage to sneak past mountains, deserts, and dynasties. The morning mist curls over the yellow river like a scroll, half-dash unrolled. Roosters call in the distance. The air smells of soy, cedar, and centuries, and they're nestled quietly between bamboo groves and worn brickies, a place called Kaifeng, home to the most Eastern Jewish community ever recorded in the medieval world. The Kaifeng Jews have been here for over 1,000 years. They built a synagogue during the Northern Song dynasty. They read Torah. They kept kosher. They even had Chinese surnames that translated into biblical lineage. One family claimed descent from Reuben, another from Levi, a third from, wait for it, Naphtali. Historians still argue whether these families were merchants from Persia, descendants of Babylonian exiles, or, yes, members of the lost tribes who wandered so far they ran out of road. No one knows for sure, but when you step into a modest courtyard in Kaifeng and an elder shows you his prayer book right to left in fading Hebrew characters, it's hard not to believe. He tells you they called their god Tianju, Heavenly Master, but they still honored the Sabbath. They wrapped their scrolls in silk. They sang blessings over rice and fish. They lit candles on Friday night, even when no one remembered why. You ask if they knew about Jerusalem. He nods. We knew it was west. We prayed in that direction. Always west. A fringe detail for your collection. When Jesuit missionaries met the Kaifeng Jews in the 1600s, they were amazed. The Jews had no idea there were other Jewish communities anywhere, and yet they kept the core of the faith alive, like embers in A snowstorm their Torah scrolls were missing a few books. Their Hebrew was creative, but their hearts still burning. You wandered through the old streets of Kaivng. No synagogue stands today, floods and time swallowed it centuries ago. But the descendants remained. They blend in now, speak Mandarin, live ordinary lives. Still, a few families light candles, a few still whisper ancient blessings, and one woman shows you a silver pendant shaped like the tablets of Moses. She tucks it under her shirt like a secret, and maybe that's what it's always been, a secret, not one that's hidden, but one that lives quietly in customs, in rituals, in the lullabies no one else understands. You sit by the riverbank at sunset. The water flows slow and amber. Hey, Huron lifts off in silence. The world seems paused. You take a deep breath. And now, gentle listener, as we begin to wind things down, close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the journey settle in your bones. You've wandered far tonight, from Babylon to India, from the highlands of Afghanistan to the coast of China. You've listened to forgotten songs, read faded scrolls, tasted exile and hope in every step. You've met people who called themselves Ephraim, Dan, Levian, some who didn't call themselves anything at all, but still lit candles on Friday nights because their ancestors once did. You've seen how stories stretch, how memories refuse to die, how being lost isn't always about being gone, but about waiting to be seen again. And maybe you understand. The lost tribes of Israel aren't just a historical puzzle. They're a mirror. They reflect the part of us that drifts, searches, clings to ritual, and dreams of return. So take one more breath. Let your mind drift toward the starlit deserts and quiet mountaintops we passed through. Let the footsteps of the 10 tribes echo softly in your imagination, steady, silent, still walking, because maybe they were never meant to be found in one place. Maybe they were meant to be felt everywhere, in every yearning, in every lullaby, in every story told by Fireht. And maybe, just maybe, you carried part of them with you this whole time. Sleep well now.